Errol Spence Terence Crawford. Is this the fight of the century, or is there a bigger fight to be made? What's good, everybody? It's your boy, Cardinal Red. But let's talk about it. Alright, y'all. So we are officially less than 7 days, less than a week away from the fight of the decade, fight of the century, fight of the year, whatever you want to call it. You know, this is a huge fight for the sport of boxing. My question is there a bigger fight to be made? And what is that fight? I just want to give my 2 cents on that and break it down for whoever listening.
It's going to be battle of the will and who can break who down. And I know that I can break him down. I know that he's not as durable as me. And my skill set is just going to overpower anything that he brings to the table.
Alright, y'all. So when it comes to Errol Spence and Terence Crawford and how big this fight is, the magnitude of this fight, you know, everybody's going to try to compare it to the biggest fight in boxing history, which is Mayweather and Pacquiao. And I will say that the anticipation and the build-up for that fight was probably the biggest in sports history when it comes to boxing. When it comes to Spence and Crawford, I don't think this fight is on that level because the hype isn't as big as that fight was. Listen, that fight was so big. I still got people I won't talk to, personal friends, more than 10 years, that I refuse to talk boxing with those people because of that fight, you know, and it's just going to end up in a huge argument. It might end up in some old school fisticuffs. Back when it was boxing like this. Give in, you dirty rascal. That's how big that fight is. That fight was big enough to break up friendships. You know, it was a huge fight for the sport of boxing.
Wow, let me load up my guns.
I don't think this fight is on that level at all. And, you know, there's another reason I don't think this fight is on that level at all. And probably will never be. And it's because of the money that was discussed surrounding that fight. It wasn't just because the money was so big when the fight happened. The entire time that they were talking about that fight, you know, the numbers just kept going up. When it first was announced, the numbers for that fight might have been as big as Spence and Crawford, or maybe even bigger, even when it was first announced. And we all know what it ended up being, and that it ended up being the highest grossing fight in boxing history. So unless they can pull that off, and I highly doubt that they can pull off being the highest grossing fight in boxing history, because it hasn't been, you know, discussed dollar-wise about this fight. You know, nowhere at any time during discussions about this fight have the dollar amounts ever went as high as Mayweather Pacquiao. So I don't think it'll hit that, and I don't think it should be trying to hit that. But I do think it's going to set some records in its own way. It might end up being the 3rd place fight in history. It might end up being the 4th place fight in history. But I don't think it's going to hit that number 1 spot. And is this the biggest fight of the century? Is this the biggest fight to be made in the sport of boxing?
One thing, calm down. Slow your roll.
You know, I think that is a complicated question to answer because, listen, if Usyk Fury was to be signed tomorrow, I think that would be the biggest fight in boxing that could be made at the moment. The thing I've said about Spence versus Crawford in the past is that Spence versus Crawford is the biggest American fight that could be made at the moment. And I think that's the most money to be made off a fight that is 2 Americans. Now, if you put Usyk Fury together, I think that's the biggest global fight that could be made at the moment. And I think it would most likely do bigger numbers than Spence versus Crawford.
Once you get a fighter, what you should do is take them through the basics. Learn how to step when you're throwing your punches. You know what I mean? How to step. That's the first thing I'll teach my students. How to step, how to throw their punches correctly, how to turn your hips, use your legs the right way. You know what I mean? And then from there, I have them work on defense. I don't throw none of my fighters in the ring to see where they're coming from or nothing like that, because you'll mess their mind up. When they get in there and they get hit with a shot, man, you won't see them fight them guys no more.
Now, Spence versus Canelo is another fight. I think if they made it tomorrow, it would do bigger numbers than Spence versus Crawford. Simply because I think Canelo's fan base is so big. He has such a big Hispanic fan base. They're going to tune in for Canelo. And then there's almost like a racial tension to go along with that. So there's going to be a lot of build-up behind that fight. And it most likely would do huge numbers, similar most likely to Fury, Uzeki. Maybe not Pacquiao, Mayweather, but I think similar to what Fury and Uzeki could possibly do if they were to, step in and make their fight tomorrow, which I don't think is going to happen anytime soon, but, we can always hope. But are there any other fights out there that could be possibly made, that could be bigger than this fight? There's so much time left in the decade and, in the century. I can't say, really. If I was to look at just this year, let's just focus on this year, is this the biggest fight to be made of this year? I think if Gervonta Davis and Devin Haney get it on, it can most likely rival Spence versus Crawford. I think that's a big fight. I think if Gervonta Davis was to move up to 147 pounds and make a fight with, a Spence, let's just say, just for the sake of saying, if he moved up and made a fight with Spence, it would be a huge fight, or if he moved up and made a fight with Crawford, it would be a huge fight.
Yeah, I saw the fight you had with Mike Tyson. You beat him pretty bad. I think you should fight him again. Yeah, like tomorrow.
Let's just say if, once again, Canelo and Spence get it on, it's going to be a huge fight. If a Devin Haney was to move up to 147 pounds and make a Spence fight, I think it would be a huge fight. Would it rival the Spence versus Crawford? It would depend on the build-up, and what Devin Haney could pull off in the meantime. Like if he goes and takes 140-pound fight and just demolishes his opponent like Pacquiao did when he moved to 140, it could definitely build up some serious anticipation for a 147-pound showdown.
Oh, round 8, rope-a-dope.
So I think it's hard to say when you're trying to predict something that's that far out, Now, could this be the fight of the year? It can most likely be the fight of the year, especially if, Charlo and Canelo doesn't do well, doesn't sell well. If Fury and Uzeki don't get it on before the end of the year. If Devin Haney and Gervonta Davis don't end up fighting before the end of the year. I think that there's still a few fights that could be made that could rival this fight. Because I think this fight is going to do well. It's probably going to do well over 1 million buys. I just don't think it's going to do Mayweather-Pacquiao numbers. And it's going to take a special fight to do Mayweather-Pacquiao numbers. Now, if we're setting new history here and we're not even paying attention to Mayweather-Pacquiao, they got the last century. If we're talking about this century, I wouldn't even say, that any fight done this year or in the next 5 years will more than likely be the fight of the century. It's just, too much time left in the century, to be had, and too many huge fights that could possibly be. We don't know what Boots is going to be in a year, 2 years, 3 years. We don't know where Canelo is going to be in a year. We don't know where Tyson Fury is going to be in a year. We don't know what the heavyweight division is going to look like in a year or 2 years. We don't know what the welterweight. There's so many possibilities. We don't know what Gervonta Davis is going to evolve into after 135 pounds. He might be the greatest fighter in history. So I think there's too much time left. I think this fight is a push in the right direction. I think this fight is going to set the precedent for other super duper fights to be made in boxing. And I think this fight is going to do great numbers. I think this fight possibly outdoes Gervonta Davis, Ryan Garcia, maybe around 2 million buys. I think this fight most likely will be right behind or a few paces behind Mayweather Pacquiao. And if it does a rematch and the rematch is just as good or better, then, that's when we'll have to talk about fights of the centuries and fights of the decades and fights of the years and all that type of stuff. Because I think the rematch is where the real story is going to be told.
What you mean you're going to build him a basketball rim? Hank, the Lord's gave you the money for the rim. What is wrong with you?
Hey, that money, it wasn't no more basketball rims. We ain't no more basketball rim. I'm going to build him a crate. Stop! Sit down!
The first one's going to be good. The rematch is going to be a classic, and it's really going to tell the tale.
I pull up, we at dinner, we having fun talking. They passing around chocolate bars. The chocolate bar get to me, I'm like, I'm cool. They like, oh no, that's shrooms. I'm like, oh no, I'm definitely cool. Now, everybody at the table on shrooms, and they all trying to explain to me what fucking shrooms do. But they all saying different shit. One nigga talking about, no, it opened up your third eye. Y'all ate 6 chocolate bars in this motherfucker. What the fuck is microdosing? You sure you don't want to take it? No, I don't take Caucasian people drugs. I take nigga drugs, like smoke some fucking weed. Right.
Y'all let me know what y'all think about all that down in the comment section below. That like button for me. Share. Subscribe. Holler at me on all social media platforms. That Facebook, that Instagram, that YouTube, that Twitter. But you're more than likely to get a response on the tube. So holler at me over there. Want to collabo, feature a product or your channel on my channel, to hit my Gmail, because it is a flock of cards at gmail.com. And we are
I'ma keep it funky with these niggas. I don't give a fuck about your mixtape. I'ma keep it funky with these bitches. I don't give a fuck if your kids ate. I'ma keep it funky with these niggas. I don't give a fuck if you got a plan. I'ma keep it funky with these bitches. I don't give a fuck if you got a man. I'ma keep it funky with these niggas. I don't give a fuck if you getting money. I'ma keep it funky with these bitches. I don't give a fuck if it was your cousin. I'm still fucking. Keeping it funky. I'ma keep it funky with these niggas. I'ma keep it funky with these niggas. I'ma keep it funky with these niggas. I'ma keep it funky with these bitches. I'ma keep it funky with these bitches. I'ma keep it funky with these niggas. You don't need to know if you gotta ask. I'ma keep it funky with these bitches. If I'm fucking with you, then you gotta ask. I'ma keep it funky with these niggas. Don't come to the hood, you don't have a pass. I'ma keep it funky with these bitches. Be careful, don't get robbed for that Prada bag. I'ma keep it funky with these niggas. Sometimes you gotta let a nigga know. I'ma keep it funky with these bitches. Every girl ain't a bitch, but every bitch is a hoe. Ayo, I'ma keep it funky with these niggas. I'm keeping it funky. I'ma keep it funky with these niggas. I'ma keep it funky with these niggas. I'ma keep it funky with these bitches. I'ma keep it funky with these bitches.